Cristina Costantini, welcome to Top Docs.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I can't wait to talk about Sally. I love the film. I think it's a terrific portrait, really multiple portraits, which we'll talk about in a
Thank you.
minute. But congratulations, great film.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've seen it now a few times, and it really holds up with multiple viewings. So that is always a true test.
Well, thanks for watching it multiple times. I've seen it so many times I can't watch it anymore. So
I bet. So I wanted to just, ask, like, what was the first time that you heard the name Sally Ride?
yeah. I truthfully can't remember not knowing who Sally Ride is because she was my hero as a kid. And as early as third grade, I know I was obsessed with her because and I have proof. We were asked to paint a mural on the outside of my elementary school wall, and I picked Sally as my hero. We were all painting our heroes, and she's it was Milwaukee, Wisconsin in the 90s, so she's between Brett Favre and Michael Jordan. And um I remember I did a book report about her. I remember looking her up on Encarta 97 and like spending a long time looking at her life story. And I really think it wasn't a complicated equation. I think it was just if a girl could go to space, I'm a girl, maybe I can do big things too. And I think I also really liked that like her job embodied bravery. Girls aren't supposed to be sporty or brave or do these huge epic cinematic things. And I think just seeing a girl leaving the Earth's atmosphere, going to space, that was what moved me. And I think she captured the imagination of many women for that reason. She was doing what we're not supposed to be able to do. Um, and yeah, my obsession and love for Sally continued into adulthood. I watched interviews with her, and she was always so smart and put together and funny. And I really loved how she answered interviewers' questions. And then when she passed away, I learned with the rest of the world that she was survived by her female life partner of 27 years. And I thought, oh my God, if NASA was not ready for women, I'm sure they would not have been ready for this. So what would that have been like? And I think a lot about our heroes and who they actually are. And with Sally and with a lot of our heroes, they often end up hurting the people closest for them for the benefit of people that they'll never meet. And to me, that's a really striking and sad reality of what their heroism means up close. And so I wanted to tell a story of what that looked like and the effects that kind of the public pressure had on this person we love so much.
I think that the film really does demonstrate your search for answers to those questions. So I applaud you for asking some really engaging questions from the get-go because it really does course through the film. I'm wondering, I really don't have a sense of like the name Sally Ride today. And like I'm really interested in general about this question of what lingers in the public memory about certain major cultural figures over time. Because some
Mhm.
seem to fade, others don't. And I'm not sure where to place Sally Ride in that. For younger people, do they know the name Sally Ride?
That's a great question. I assumed because I was a big fan of Sally, like she'd be, super recognizable. Everyone would know her. But I've learned through making this that a lot of people don't. And even our producer, a queer woman, she like had never heard of Sally or maybe had learned about her and forgotten about her. And I think, oftentimes with musicians where their music lives on and so they remain names that you hear and talk about. With someone like Sally, for whatever reason, I think she's faded from the public imagination. And so I do think that part of what we wanted to do with this film is remind people of who Sally was and the amazing things that she did, but also introduce her to a new audience. And I think this secret story that she had makes her more relevant than ever. And I think the film will find a younger audience who will appreciate, rewriting American history to include this like queer story that has been suppressed for so many heroes of ours, surely since the beginning of time. People are calling her the first queer astronaut, But we don't know, you know, that's
No, we don't.
like the history was very straight for a very long time. So she might be, but we don't know.
I'm curious if that third grade mural is still there, if you know.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Okay.
I went back and visited it and took some pictures with it just a few months ago. So
So at least
it's
people who went through your school probably ask the question, who is that lady? And they know.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
The big surprise for me here is, learning about Tam O'Shaughnessy, who was in a 27-year relationship and life partnership with Sally. This didn't come out until her obituary, which was intentional because Sally did not want it known, and Tam went along with that. Um,
Mhm.
but what ends up happening here is we kind of get a dual portrait or even three portraits. There's the portrait of Sally Ride, Tam O'Shaughnessy, whose story we get to learn about, and Sally and Tam, the couple, which is kind of its own portrait.
Mhm.
How did you first connect with Tam, and what interested you about wanting to collaborate with her to tell these multiple stories, this layered story?
Yeah. Well, I'm a documentary filmmaker, so I'm always looking for stories and what angles of stories haven't been told. And I often go back to my childhood and look at the stories that moved me then. So I approached National Geographic and asked them if they would ever want to do a Sally Ride story, and they said, actually, we're already doing one, and we're working with this production company, Syndicate. They've made contact with Tam O'Shaughnessy, and would you guys like to meet? Maybe we could all work on this together. And that is was really a dream. But the moment I met Tam, when after they introduced us, I knew that there was something really special about Tam because, oftentimes when someone dies, their loved ones say, want to paint a perfect portrait of who they are, and they don't want to open them up as a real person because for fear of, complicating their legacy. And much to Tam's credit, she really wanted to open up. She really understood that, Sally will be more lovable when people understand that she was flawed or that she made decisions that hurt people, that she wasn't like a perfect angel in every single way. And so I knew if Tam wanted to go there, we would have a much more interesting film. And you don't often find that as a documentary filmmaker. That's pretty rare, actually. And so the better I got to know Tam, and I think we built a trust that she really understood what I wanted to do with the film. I don't think she understood she was going to be such a big part of it, but the more she opened up, and I think there's a real vulnerability in front of the camera that I really admire, and that's really hard to do to open yourself up to the entire world's judgments, especially after a lifetime of keeping things so close to the chest. Yeah, I love Tam, and I think she's the reason that the film is having an effect that it's having.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask you, about building that trust with her because it definitely comes through in the film.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind the film wouldn't have been as good if you hadn't made that connection with her and made her feel comfortable with you as director and sharing the personal archive, the photos, telling
Yeah.
some of the really revealing personal, intimate details.
We spend a lot of time with her off camera, which helps. But I think at a base level, we really like each other. I think like we get along really well. She has a great sense of humor. She likes having fun. We just clicked, and she clicked with our whole team, and we're kind of have this shared passion for Sally. Obviously, hers much deeper than mine. I think it helped that, most of our team was queer, and she, felt a certain ease with us that she might not have felt in the past about talking about her story. One of the greatest privileges of this film was really like Sally had the coolest friends, and so
Mm.
we got to spend a year interviewing and hanging out with brilliant astronauts, athletes, Billie Jean King. Their friend group is amazing. It's like Diana Nyad, who's not in the film, but just very, very smart, funny, quick women who've had immense impacts on our world. So it was a real privilege to be able to hang out with Sally's crew, and I'm glad she has such a great one because I get to meet all of them. So
Yeah, and
Molly, her first girlfriend, is amazing. All
mhm.
of them, they're such cool women.
There's just a lot of great interviews in this film, and I am going to get back to Billie Jean, but I
Yeah.
want to talk about NASA for a second. the story of how Sally became an astronaut and then ended up being the first American woman in space. It's a great story. Through that story, we obviously learn about Sally, but we also learn about the space program and how resistant it was to women and really all people other than, seemingly straight white men,
Mhm.
until really 1978, which was the first class of astronauts that NASA intentionally wanted to be diverse in a
Mhm.
number of ways. And it included, the first class of women, including Sally. One of the stats that I think Sally mentions, I'm not sure, is 4 out of 4,000 technical employees at the Johnson Space Center were women. I mean, that's staggering.
Crazy.
Yeah,
1 in 1,000.
yeah.
It's, I mean, it's intentional at a certain, it's clearly they were responding to the pressure of the time to reform, but 4 out of 4,000 is a pretty staggering number.
Yeah, and I love the quote from Tam. I'll just repeat it here that women astronauts had a fine line to walk. On the one hand, they wanted to blend in, but they also had to find a way to confront the sexism baked into the culture of NASA at the time.
Yeah.
And you definitely see that play out in the film. There's a really great kind of behind the scenes interview with Judith Resnick, who was also in the class of 78 with Sally and later went
Yeah.
up in the space shuttle a few times. There's an off-camera reporter asking, or interviewer asking Judith to comment about women astronauts, being a female astronaut versus being a male. And there's a
Yeah.
split second where I think you see Judith considering whether to answer the question, and then she just shuts it down. And it's
Yeah.
clear that she has made that calculation that Tam is talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the women wanted the last thing on anyone's mind to be their gender, and I think they did a lot to, to fit in, to be one of the guys. They needed to be seen as one of the guys, and so they changed how they dressed, they changed how they spoke. They wanted to everyone to forget that they were women and just respect them as astronauts. But NASA, their fellow astronauts, and the media were obsessed with it and couldn't talk about anything else. And it's shocking, I think, to watch some of the interviews, even people who we love, like Tom Brokaw, interviewing Judy Resnick. Now, I'm sure he would never say this in an interview, but he says, Judy, don't people say to you, you're too cute to be an astronaut? And like these kind of absurd questions that these women with PhDs who are top of their class that would have to contend with. And I think I'm so grateful to them that they handled these questions so well because if it were not, there are a million ways you could have tripped up, and they did such an incredible job. And I think they felt that pressure that if I mess up, who knows if they're going to let other people do this ever again, and other women do this again, or other people of color. And so being the first carries an immense amount of weight. And I am so grateful that Sally and Judy and all of those women excelled in every way.
They did. They were incredible astronauts. There's another great sort of off-camera exchange, this one between Sally and an interviewer who has the misfortune of calling her Miss Bride. And Sally just shuts her down and says it's either Doctor or Sally, but not Miss. That is awesome.
There's a lot of interviewers being shut down in this movie, myself included. If you see, there's Joyce Ride is Sally's mother, and part of what we wanted to show is where Sally's introversion comes from. One of my favorite parts of the film is Joyce Ride refusing to answer any of my questions. And I
Yeah.
used to be an investigative journalist, so I've done some of my hard interviews with drug lords and traffickers and CEOs of companies who've had things to hide. But Joyce Ride, her 100-year-old mother, was the hardest interview I've ever done in my whole life. And I love watching her shut me down. I think it's the funniest part of the film.
Yeah, it's great. You'd mentioned early in our conversation that you were really captivated by the interviews you'd seen with Sally really
Mhm.
growing up, not prior to even working on this film. And I
Mhm.
have to say that I was absolutely fascinated by these interviews.
Mhm.
Um, and truly blown away. I think Sally was an incredible interviewee
Mhm.
throughout all these press interviews and other kinds of interviews. I mean,
Yeah.
she approaches these interviews the way like a top professional athlete practices their craft. She's
Yeah.
precise, she's always in control. She knows exactly what to say, how to say it, knows how much to reveal, how much to leave out, when and how to smile and laugh, be self-deprecating, but also self-confident, but never arrogant.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
astonishing how good she is.
I was fascinated. By the way, she uses humor to deflect things very quickly, and how to shut people down, how to answer a question and not say anything else, which is a very hard thing to do. I think we know this as people who interview. If you leave this space, people usually fill it. And Sally never had any need to fill that white space. People would ask her, "Do you ever feel scared, or do you ever think about X or Y or Z?" And she would just say, "No," and then wait for the next question, which is a very, very hard thing to do.
See, you're doing it now. No. Yeah. No,
Someone will
I'm,
fill space, and it's usually the person you're interviewing, and I'm sure that you've experienced this with
yeah,
as an interview.
for sure. And there's a fine line too. Again, we're talking about fine lines, that her approach can come across as sort of practiced and uninteresting. I mean, we've all heard interviews with athletes and it's the same tropes over and over again. One game at a time, blah, 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 all that stuff. She's listening to each question and she's giving thoughtful answers. It's not like she's being bland.
I love the one, I think it's Jane Pauley. There's the one interview where the interviewer asks her, "Do you ever, this might be an inappropriate question, but do you ever think about having children?" And she goes, "I think that is an inappropriate question. We'd prefer not to talk about it," and just holds that line. But I'm always shocked listening to it that she's like calling out the interviewer and holding firm on what she does and she doesn't want to do. And I think that was very Sally. She knew her line and she would hold it. And I have a lot of respect for her. NASA would ask her to do Bob Hope. She thought Bob Hope was very sexist, and they wouldn't let up in pressuring her. And so she just disappeared. She knew her power, and she just didn't tell anyone where she was going, disappeared, didn't do Bob Hope, waited for the special to be over, and then returned back to civilization.
You mentioned doing a portrait. You didn't use this term, but I think we can say warts and all, showing she wasn't a perfect human being. She had her flaws, she had her quirks.
Mhm.
There's a great anecdote from Kathy Sullivan, who was also in Sally's class of 78 at NASA. And she tells this story about, I think it's Kathy, how
Yeah.
basically she surmises that Sally sort of gently sabotaged a training session in which Kathy was practicing on the space shuttle's robot arm, and Sally
Yeah.
flipped all the breakers to just shut it down. There was definitely a competitive streak with Sally. She denied that she wanted to be first. She just wanted to go up in space. That was the thing. But others pretty much say, yeah, she really did want to be first.
No, I think she definitely wanted to be first. She's a competitive person, and she knew that that position carried the special. We're talking about her now. But I love those moments because in the film, Bear Ride would say, "Oh, she was just joking around. That was a prank." She would, but when the stakes are that high, a prank means something else. So when you're competing to be the first, but Kathy seems to definitely think it was sabotage of some sort, or at least saying, "Hey, like stay off my patch." But I love that about Sally. I love that she's not perfect, and because that makes her much more relatable to me as an imperfect person, that she's was doing kind of these wild things. And she was also very young. She was 26 at the time. So who knows if an adult Sally would have done that. She was the youngest astronaut at that time. And she was maybe being playful. But it's those stories I love.
Yeah.
Her disobeying, her sabotaging, her competitive nature, her strategy.
Another really interesting interview in the film is with her former husband, Steve Hawley. For folks who haven't seen the film yet, who is Steve Hawley and why did they get married? I'll just
Yeah, I
lead
mean,
with
well, that's the question
that.
I'm not sure anyone can quite
Yeah.
answer. But they were married about a year before Sally went up to space. It was a marriage that surprised everyone in her life, her sister included. Not many people could understand why. They got married one weekend, everybody in white jeans, and they didn't tell anybody. And then they ran it in the newspaper. And it depends who you ask. Some people say, well, it was Sally just living on a whim and doing what Sally felt like to do right in that moment. Other people see it as a little bit more strategic. It would make a good headline. If there were questions about her sexuality, it would shut them down. If she was going to get married to a man at some point, might as well be this guy who's very, very nice. I admire Steve a lot for doing the interview, for sitting down. He initially said he didn't want to talk about anything personal, but then when he did sit down, he went there and he wanted to go there, and the marriage fell apart. And Sally actually started seeing Tam in the middle of the marriage, and Steve didn't know about it. So, I don't think it was handled particularly well by Sally, which is, another part of her being this complicated person. And yeah, their marriage fell apart, and but Steve really didn't learn about Tam and how long their relationship had been going on until 2012 when she passed away. And it said in the obituary that they had been together for 27 years, and he had to do the math back and
Wow.
figured out it was concurrent. So
And I think we mentioned he was also in her, if we didn't mention it, Steve was also in this class of 78.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He
So he
was an
was a peer.
incredible brain. He was an incredible technical brain. Brilliant, brilliant guy, and also very funny. I think they shared that. Their sense of humor was definitely what they bonded on.
I think it's great that he agreed to talk to you and it definitely adds more layers to the story and he does end up opening up about the personal and I think it reflects well on him as a person that he's willing to do that and certainly helps give even more dimensions to the portrait of Sally.
Thank you. Yeah, we really didn't expect him to go there, so it was a big win for us as a team because I think it really adds to your understanding of what her thinking was and who she was and why she did what she did.
So gotta talk about Billie Jean King. The parallels with Billie Jean and Sally are striking and amazing since they actually knew each other from when Sally was very young,
Yeah.
because Sally played tennis at a high level, not as high as Tam, who was a professional for a while, but Sally was a, a great player and a coach or a counselor at a tennis camp, if we want
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
specific. But you know, the parallels are there. I mean, Billie Jean was at the top of her sport. Sally is at the top of space exploration and NASA. You know, Billie Jean was a pioneer of women's sports. She fought against sexism, and she too was married to a man and in a relationship with a woman. The difference is Billie Jean was outed by a former lover who sued her for palimony. And she paid, you know, a tremendous price for this. She lost all her endorsements, and she was basically cast aside as sort of hero for her personal life, which is really tragic and extremely unfair. As we all know, Billie Jean came back and then some, and is thankfully given her just due as the true American hero. I don't think we actually know what Sally took from Billie Jean's experience, but her sister seems to think that what happened to Billie Jean must have served as a warning to Sally about keeping her private life private.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she was Sally's greatest hero, and to see that happen to your hero, who you knew as a kid, who you idolized. Sally wanted to be a pro athlete, and seeing the woman who is shaping that whole field and making great progress, seeing her downfall, it must have had an incredible effect on Sally. And I think the marriage with Steve was shortly after that, and I don't think it was coincidental. I think it very much, I believe, informed her need to, if you had these feelings, suppress them And if it helps you get to space faster, great. So I think that must have been part of the equation for Sally. Sally was kind of hesitant to be the symbol of one movement, and I think she definitely didn't want to be the symbol of another movement. And so I think that definitely informed her decision to stay closeted until she died. And I think while she was such a introvert and she was really good master compartmentalizer, and I don't think it had a huge emotional toll on Sally, it certainly did on Tam. And so Tam was kind of the real victim of Sally's choice to live her life the way she did. In some ways, the film paints this full portrait and allows us to celebrate Tam the way that other astronauts' partners have been celebrated throughout history. Like the early Mercury astronauts, the Apollo astronauts, they would land, they would be pictured with with their wives, and the wives would have profiles written about them, and they would be a big part of the story, of the American story. And Tam never had that, and so I hope that this film will give that to her in some way.
It's tragic that she wasn't able to not only be recognized, but also to live her own life the way she wanted to, which was as an
Yeah.
honest, open person who was comfortable in her own skin. Sally's wishes to keep everything private, keep the relationship a secret, deprived Tam of part of herself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's also a lot, and it was in the small moments. It was you're traveling to a conference and you're sharing one room, and you have to hide just that simple fact that you're going back to the same room together, or that the dog that you have is both of your dog. Just these tiny things, you're kind of always living a small lie. And I think for Sally it didn't bother her that much, but I think for Tam it really had this heaviness and this weight. And she would kind of find herself kind of withdrawing from conversation, or being very quiet, or feeling awkward in the small moments of, well, who is this person? Why are they here with you? Yeah, I think it's really tragic, and that society forced the two of them into this kind of relationship. And I think feels now very freed to tell her story. And that's part of the reason she really wanted to participate and be part of the film.
Yeah, Tam says being a secret took more of a toll on me than on Sally. And there's a photo that's it's not on the screen for very long. It's not really a major story point, but it's one that had special resonance for me, which was a photo of Billie Jean, Sally, Tam, and Billie Jean's life partner, Alana Kloss.
Yeah.
And three of the people, Billie Jean, Sally and Alana are smiling at the camera, and Tam is looking off axis and looking unhappy.
Yeah.
And it really seems to be a visual expression of what being a secret took from her and
Yeah.
the toll it took on
Quite a
her.
few people have noticed, if you in the pictures that are in our film, and not intentionally, but these are the pictures that exist. And I mean, we noticed this about the pictures, but few people have noted that Sam looks like she's looking down or away in many of these group setting pictures. And we don't have any footage of those time periods, but it seems from the photos that you can sense that kind of sadness that came um, along with the secret that she was holding.
And the other part of that photo that resonates with me is knowing about the relationship between Billie Jean and her life partner, Alana Kloss,
Right.
because they have not lived in the closet. I don't think the broader culture knows about Alana Kloss, but certainly everyone in the tennis world does. It's not a secret. And it's been a key factor in Billie Jean's resurgence and sort of having this whole second life as an
Yeah.
American icon. And to me, it's like, oh, this is what it could have been for Sally
Yeah.
and Tam.
Yeah, I often think about that. I think if Sally hadn't died in 2012, when things were really felt like they were really turning in terms of the gay rights movement, I wonder if she would be out today, and I wonder what that would look like, and I wonder if she would be, yeah, Tam suspects that she would be, that there would have been, the culture was changing, and she would be able to be her full self. Who knows? Who knows? It's sad. It's very sad to me that she didn't get to experience or see all of the progress that has been made, and Billie Jean was a big part of it.
I wanted to ask about the sequence in the film in which you depict the moment where they come together, they have this dinner, and they have, I think it's their first kiss, and it's the big romantic reveal in the film. And you do work with reenactments, you do work with some other sort of visual flourishes. Can you just talk about your creative approach to that moment?
The project is two different, the film is two different stories. One is this na very public NASA story, this the Sally that we all knew. And that one was incredibly well documented. We had 5,000 reels of NASA footage that we went through, and that was almost too well documented. That was our problem. And then with Sally and Tam, we had like 5 pictures of them together as a couple. And if you're in a visual medium like we are, you can't tell a romantic love story with just 5 pictures alone. So we knew we had to have some kind of visual device or some kind of visual language. And so for me, film stock always has this beautiful kind of warm feeling of a memory. And so we decided to shoot on 16 millimeter film these sequences that are, you could call them reenactments or visual devices. But to me, I wanted to capture kind of the feelings of memories that Tam was narrating. So they're Tam's memories, from Tam's perspective. The first time she met Sally and seeing her go up when they were 12 and 13 years old, going up onto her tippy toes, or the first steak dinner that they had, or the moment that she felt Sally's hand on her lower back and thought, "Oh, that's not what friends usually do." We shot these in with actresses and here in LA, and it was my first time doing that kind of sequence, but I really wanted to capture the feeling of falling in love, the feeling of having a secret, the feeling of the excitement that you feel, and those initial crush stages of a relationship. So, yeah, we shot on 16 millimeter. I've never shot on film before, and that was an exciting and scary thing because you don't know. We can see exactly. We can play back immediately and say, like, did we get it? Did it look good? And you obviously can't do that with films, but there's surprising grains and artifacts, and you have light leaking in at certain moments that, feels warm and like a memory. So I was very happy with how they turned out and capture kind of the warmth of that era and match into the other 16 millimeter that NASA was shooting at the time.
I think it all does work well together, the reenactments with the interviews and the archival. And I think one testament to that is the audience reaction. So this is probably my last question, but I wanted to ask you if you have been at all surprised by the audience reaction, because what I've seen is that this may be the tearjerker of the year, that
Oh my
audiences
gosh.
really come out of the theater bawling. Like this
Wow.
film really generates quite an emotional response among people and very different people, different ages, different types of folks.
Well,
What's
thank
been
you.
your sense of that, and does that surprise you?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's been it's been wonderful to see. It's what you hope for, but you never expect. And it's my first film that like is this. Most of my other films are kind of happy-go-lucky and funny, and this one deals with love and heartache in a different way. And so, it's been quite surprising. But I think, the power. It really is the power of well, love for one, but of Tam's storytelling. I think she really opened up her heart to tell this story, and people feel that when they walk out of the theaters. I think Tam has an incredible story and is an incredible woman, and she got an incredible standing ovation at Sundance. Everywhere she goes, she gets these massive standing ovations, and I think it's kind of full circle for her. She's that she's finally being celebrated for her rightful spot in American history. So, yeah, it's been quite an honor.
Well, that's great to hear. It's certainly long overdue, and I think that the film you've made about Tam and Sally certainly does justice to their story and their love for each other and for science and space exploration as well, which are a bit under fire these days. So, thank you so much for being with us today, and congratulations on the film.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making time for us. I really appreciate it.